Chicago. Its name is almost synonymous with organized crime, with the outfit, the syndicate. And this isn't just some old story, right? It's about how this whole criminal network got woven into the city itself.
Absolutely. It's fundamental to understanding Chicago.
So today, we're going to look at how it all started back in the old vice districts, how something like Prohibition completely changed the game, the links to politics, to neighborhoods, even legitimate businesses, and of course, the fight by law enforcement against it all.
It's a huge story.
It really is.
Okay.
And digging into it gives you, real insights into how cities develop, that tricky line between illegal stuff and government, how communities can shape crime, and just how hard it is to take down these powerful, corrupt groups. Stick with us, and you'll get a much clearer picture of the forces that really shape Chicago.
And that connection, the crime and the city's growth, it was there almost right from the start. Chicago just exploded in the 19th century, became this massive transportation shipping center, and that drew in all sorts of people, diverse populations. And with them, you started getting these vice districts right downtown. Places like the Willows, the Levee, they got pretty notorious.
The records mention figures like Roger Plant and his place, the Barracks Saloon, Monroe and Wells. Apparently just nonstop gambling, prostitution.
Right.
It was in this low spot. And when the city raised the street level, it left these kind of underground passages, hidden rooms.
Yeah, unintended consequences.
Exactly. And criminals used them. People actually say that physical setup, literally under the streets, might be where we get the term underworld, that hidden criminal lair.
That's a fascinating possibility for the word's origin. And then the Great Chicago Fire in 1871 obviously reshaped everything dramatically.
Huge reset.
Yeah, and after that you saw these big reform pushes, groups like the Committee of 70, Committee of 25, trying to clean things up, targeting crime, the liquor trade, trying to impose a certain, moral order. Mayor Medill, he backed them. Closed gambling joints, pushed for strict saloon laws. But, the interesting thing, maybe even a bit ironic, is that this push against vice, against alcohol, it might have actually inadvertently created openings for more organized crime later on.
So trying to stamp it out actually helped organize it?
Kind of. I mean, if you ban something people want or regulate it heavily, but the demand is still there, someone's going to supply it, and the money can be massive. Yeah. And you see that link forming early. Vice, gambling, politics, especially in places like the First Ward.
Right, the political machines.
Exactly. Figures like Hinky Dink Kenna, Bathhouse John Coughlin, they were right in the middle of it. Kenna, for example, he ran the saloon, the Working Man's Exchange.
Okay.
And he used it really cleverly to build a voter base, gave out free lunches to anyone who came in, didn't matter if they bought a drink. He'd feed, vagrants, transient folks, basically creating this block of voters he could count on come election day.
Wow. That's a direct political action using the vice economy.
Absolutely. And gambling, horse racing especially, got bigger and bigger, especially once things like the telegraph came in, letting people bet from bars, pool rooms, away from the actual track.
Technology enabling it.
Right. It wasn't just small games anymore. It was widespread, making serious money. And the politicians were often getting a cut, graft from these places, gambling dens operating openly in some areas, like Chinatown.
So you've got this foundation. Vice, gambling, political corruption, all tangled up. But the real accelerant, the thing that just blew the lid off and poured money and power into the outfit, that was Prohibition, wasn't it?
The Prohibition, yeah. The 18th Amendment, the Volstead Act, enforcing it, it came from that long temperance movement, sure, but it also really threw this cultural clash into sharp relief.
How so?
Well, you had this sort of rural, often Protestant push for abstinence, clacking hard with the cities, full of immigrant groups who just had different traditions around drinking. Making alcohol illegal didn't stop people wanting it, it just drove the whole trade underground.
And that's the crucial shift.
That's the absolute pivot point. Prohibition was like pouring gasoline on a fire. It created just unbelievable amounts of money in bootlegging. And that money, plus the violence needed to control the trade, it completely flipped the power structure.
Flipped it how?
Power moved away from the old machine politicians who used to kind of manage or get paid off by vice, and straight into the hands of the gangsters who were running the booze. They became the top dogs.
And that's when figures like Johnny Torrio and Al Capone really come onto the scene in a big way.
Key players in Chicago's bootlegging, their rise and the fight for control. I mean, it was incredibly violent. The beer wars in the 20s, just brutal. Gangs often formed along ethnic lines, fighting over territory, supply routes.
And getting the booze, moving it around.
Yeah,
that
right.
required some coordination, right?
Yeah.
even beyond Chicago.
Yeah. Definitely. The logistics were huge. Smuggling from Canada, making it locally, distributing it. Gangs in different cities had to work together sometimes. Now, during Prohibition itself, that cooperation was often, tactical, temporary. But just needing to do it, it planted the seeds for this idea of a bigger, connected, maybe even nationwide crime syndicate.
So Torrio eventually gets shot, survives, but decides he's had enough, heads to Florida.
Right. And that leaves Al Capone clearly in charge.
And Capone, he really cemented that control, didn't he? Built his team.
Surrounded himself with key guys. And when he went to prison, I think it was 1929, he didn't just leave a void. He actually named a kind of ruling council, a triumvirate. Frank Nitti, Jake Guzik, Tony Accardo, to keep things running.
Let's talk about Nitti, Frank the Enforcer Nitti. His reputation really took off under Capone.
Yeah, he was vital for the liquor operations. Smuggling, distribution, apparently had a real head for business, managing things.
Despite the nickname the Enforcer.
Right. Sources suggest that as he climbed the ladder, he mostly had other people do the rough stuff. He focused more on the business side. And his background, his Italian roots, similar to Capone's region, that helped connect the outfit to, older Sicilian and Camorra networks too. Gave them more reach, maybe some underworld credibility.
So Prohibition ends in 33. Capone's in jail by then. But the organization, it doesn't just fade away.
Not at all. The machine that Torrio and Capone built to run that huge bootlegging operation, it was strong, organized. They just pivoted, took that structure, that focus, and pointed it at other things. Gambling, prostitution, loan sharking.
And they really pushed into racketeering.
Exactly, racketeering, basically muscling in on legitimate businesses or running illegal ones using threats, intimidation, corruption. And you see the outfit doing this all over, extorting laundries, dry cleaners, parking garages, even garbage routes.
Taking a cut of everything.
Pretty much. And infiltrating labor unions became huge. Getting control of locals and big unions like the Teamsters, the hod carriers, that gave them enormous leverage.
And sometimes businesses actually ask them to come in for protection.
Yeah, that happened too. Protection from rivals, sure, but sometimes protection specifically against unions trying to organize their workers. There's this documented case, a dry cleaner owner partners with Capone to fight unionization. Led to a wave of violence against other cleaners who wouldn't join the Outfits Association.
Their influence went way beyond Chicago too, didn't it? Like Hollywood?
Oh yeah, big time. In the early 40s, they muscled into Hollywood, major studios. They did it by controlling the Theater Workers Union, threaten strikes, disrupt movie distribution. They could basically extort payments from the studios.
That's incredible reach.
It was.
Yeah.
And it eventually led to federal indictments. The Hollywood racketeering case in 43. Nitti was one of the main targets in that.
But even before that Hollywood stuff, back in the Prohibition days, law enforcement was going after Capone, right?
Yeah.
Elliot Ness and the Untouchables.
Ness and his team from the Bureau of Prohibition, yeah. They were persistent, definitely. Maybe not quite as effective as the movies portray, but they were a thorn in his side. But it was really their work, combined with the IRS, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, focusing on his money.
The tax angle.
Exactly. That's what got him in the end.
Oh.
Convicted in 31, not just for booze violations, but crucially for tax evasion on all that illegal income. That was the key.
You know, it's important to understand this wasn't just happening at the top levels. Organized crime in Chicago was like woven into the neighborhoods.
Deeply. Sociologists who studied it talked about a racket subculture.
Meaning
That research showed gangsters often came from specific communities, places with a strong gang tradition, where maybe lawlessness was kind of passed down and adult criminals actually had some status, some prestige.
like the Taylor Street area near West Side.
That's the classic example. A really dense, long-standing immigrant area became known as a major racket area.
And people like Frank Nitti grew up there.
Right. And in neighborhoods like that, kids might see figures like Nitti almost like local sports heroes, just part of the landscape, which shows how integrated they were, not seen as total outsiders, especially if they had ties to local politicians protecting them.
And the physical places matter too.
Yeah.
The clubs, the gambling spots.
For sure. These mafia clubs or betting parlors weren't just for business. They were like outposts. Places to exert control, but also really important for recruiting.
Recruiting.
Yeah. They created this kind of social atmosphere. Members, associates could hang out, build relationships, check out potential new guys, all away from prying eyes.
And you see a direct line, like with the 42 gang.
Definitely. A famous early gang, straight out of Taylor Street. During Prohibition, a lot of those guys got absorbed into Capone's syndicate. They were given a spot, basically, became the muscle, the foot soldiers for the bigger operation.
But that neighborhood connection wasn't static, was it? Things changed.
Over time, yeah. Big changes to the city fabric, urban renewal projects, expressways, cutting right through old neighborhoods, population shifting, all that stuff started to erode those really tight neighborhood-based recruitment pipelines and the visible presence of the outfit in those specific spots.
Now, besides the rackets we usually think of, there was another huge illegal enterprise, especially on the South Side. The policy racket.
Policy gambling. Yeah, that was massive, particularly in the Black community. It was basically a lottery. People bet small amounts on three-digit numbers, drawn regularly, sometimes multiple times a day.
And a whole culture grew around it.
Oh, yeah. Dream books to pick numbers, lucky candles. It was really embedded.
And there were major players running it within the community.
Key figures, definitely. Guys like Sam Young, called the father of the game, Dan Jackson, who is known as the general manager, the chief graft collector for the Black Vice Syndicate on the South Side.
And crucially, these operators had political ties.
Very strong ties. Dan Jackson was connected. The Jones brothers, also big in policy, were active in Democratic politics. The actual policy writers, the people taking the bets on the street, they often doubled as precinct workers. Invaluable for getting out the vote.
So politicians had an interest in it.
Some certainly did. Mayor Ed Kelly, later Congressman William Dawson, they understood how it worked and sometimes, helped protect Black control of the racket, gave them cover. On the flip side, Mayor Kennelly tried to crack down and lost a lot of Black political support because of it.
And economically, policy was important within the Black community.
Hugely important, especially when legitimate jobs were hard to come by. It provided work for lots of people, writers, checkers, cashiers, and maybe just as important, it kept a lot of money circulating inside the community. Congressman Dawson was very vocal about that.
But the outfit saw all that money and wanted in.
They saw profitable territory, absolutely, and they tried to muscle their way in, take it over from the Black operators, which led to serious conflict. Violence.
Against operators like Ed Jones and Teddy Rowe.
Yeah. Jones had even associated with white gangsters before, but they still came after him. Teddy Rowe, he ran his operation from the Boston Club. He famously fought back hard, had shootouts with outfit guys trying to take over, but eventually he was murdered in 1952.
That must have caused outrage.
Huge indignation in the Black community. Dawson's quote about it is famous. "If anyone is going to make money out of the frailties of my people, it's going to be my people." Really captures that feeling, who should profit from what happens in our neighborhood.
Right.
And interestingly, the outfit's violent push also seemed to push the police to act more seriously against policy. Maybe partly because they feared all that money leaving the Black community and going to white gangsters instead of staying local or, flowing through the usual political channels.
Trying to control organized crime in Chicago, historically, it wasn't just about chasing the bad guys, was it? There were bigger issues.
Definitely systemic challenges.
Oh.
The way American government is set up, kind of decentralized, with law enforcement mostly local and state. Plus, our tendency to try and legislate morality of prohibition, gambling laws, prostitution laws, that creates black markets.
And black markets mean profit and corruption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All that money from gambling and vice, it was a constant temptation, a huge source of funds to corrupt politicians. And those politicians often controlled the police, the courts, the prosecutors.
Like the West Side Bloc you mentioned earlier.
A perfect example. A bipartisan group of elected officials tied right into the outfit. They actively fought anti-crime laws. They were even linked to violence against political rivals who challenged the outfit's power in local politics. You basically had this ongoing conspiracy sometimes between criminals, politicians, even some businessmen protecting the whole setup.
What about federal efforts? Were they more effective?
It was inconsistent for a long time. You had big congressional hearings, Kefauver in the 50s, McClellan in the 60s. They shone a national spotlight on organized crime, its networks, even linking the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, to heroin coming into cities like Chicago, which then often got distributed through black networks locally.
But there was resistance at the time.
For years, yeah.
Right.
J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI famously downplayed, even denied, that traditional organized crime like the outfit really existed in a structured way. That definitely hampered federal efforts until later on when administrations started taking it more seriously.
What changed? What started working better?
New legal tools made a huge difference, especially the ICO Act, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, came in 1970 but really got used heavily starting in the 80s.
What was so powerful about RICO?
It let prosecutors target the whole criminal organization as an ongoing enterprise involved in a pattern of crime, not just individuals for specific crimes. So you could indict entire street crews, the whole leadership structure, made it much harder for them to just replace whoever got arrested and keep going.
And specific investigations used RVO effectively.
Oh, yeah. Big ones. Operation Gambat, for instance, that really laid bare the connection between the outfit and the political structure. Exposed trial fixing, judges being bribed, right up to high levels.
Wow.
And more recently, Operation Family Secrets, that was 2005, gave this incredibly detailed picture of the outfit's structure, decades of activity, led to indictments covering a 40-year Archego conspiracy, took down some old but still powerful figures.
But even with all the corruption, there were always some good cops.
Absolutely. Despite the political obstacles, especially locally, every generation of Chicago police had officers who were dedicated, who really did try to fight the outfit, often at great personal risk. You have to acknowledge that.
These investigations also gave us a glimpse inside the outfit itself, how it worked.
Yeah, they revealed a structure, subgroups, usually called street crews, often named after their territory, like the Taylor Street Crew or the Grand Avenue Crew, and a clear chain of command. A street boss, or capo, running things locally, reporting up to the top boss of the whole outfit.
And becoming a full member, a made man, that was a formal thing.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Involved ceremony, rituals. Accounts mention things like burning a holy card, maybe letting blood, symbolizing this unbreakable oath to the organization. And becoming made meant a lot more respect, more status within the outfit.
Even if you weren't formally made, just being connected mattered. Well,
hugely. Being connected meant you had contacts, you could get favors done, maybe get protection. It gave you status, weight, people called it in certain circles or industries, meant outfit guys might listen if you had a business idea, legal or illegal.
and then you had the wannabes.
Right. People attracted to the lifestyle, the mystique, maybe from movies or whatever. They'd hang around outfit members looking for excitement, access, maybe some reflected glory, even if they weren't really involved in the heavy stuff themselves.
You often hear about these supposed internal rules in groups like the outfit, like don't hurt innocent people, don't hurt cops, don't steal from each other.
Yeah, you hear that talk, but when you look at the actual history, the documented stuff from investigations, testimony, those rules often seem more like, well, convenient myths than reality.
How so?
The record is just brutal. It's full of violence against rivals, sure, but also against police officers who got in their way, political figures who wouldn't play ball, union officials who resisted, and stealing from victims, from associates, absolutely happened. Maybe things changed in more recent decades, maybe tactics shifted, but the historical outfit, their actions often flew right in the face of those supposed principles.
So looking back at this whole story, what kept the outfit going for so long? What were the key ingredients to its power?
A few really critical things, I think. First, just basic supply and demand. There was always public demand for illegal stuff, gambling, booze during Prohibition, loan sharking. That created the market, the profit.
Okay, the market. What else?
Second, political corruption. Absolutely vital. It was the shield. Corrupting politicians and law enforcement gave them protection, allowed them to operate more openly, avoid prosecution. That collusion we talked about, criminals, politicians, sometimes business was key.
Right, the protection racket, essentially, at a higher level.
In a way, yeah. And third, how deeply embedded they were in certain neighborhoods. That social fabric, that culture, it gave them a base, a recruitment pool, and a level of community tolerance, or maybe just fear, that made it really hard for outsiders like the police to penetrate effectively.
So what started to weaken them then?
It seems like a combination of things. Those neighborhoods changed socially, economically. That likely disrupted the old ways of recruiting, the deep community ties. And at the same time, law enforcement got more persistent and, crucially, got better tools, like IO. Targeting the organization itself, not just the individuals, that seems to have been a major factor in gradually chipping away at their structure and power.
So the story of the Chicago outfit is really this complex tale of crime, power, community corruption. Yeah. All playing out in a major American city.
It's a fascinating and often dark reflection of urban life, illicit economies, and that constant struggle between organized crime and the forces trying to control it.
And thinking about this long, often violent history, it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What does this story, the outfit story, tell us about the ongoing challenge of governing cities, especially where illegal money and established power get so tangled up? How do you ever truly untangle that?